and it was very enlightening and joyful. And then I had an experience that is like, I picked this picture on the background because it's outer space, and that little thing right there is a kid. If you blow it up big enough, you can see that's a child sitting there with her, it looks like a girl, her elbows on her knees at the entrance of some kind of a starport. But anyway, it felt like I had an experience traveling through the universe, in an ability to see the glory and power and magnitude and infinity of all these things, and all the confusion evaporated. I knew exactly what was being asked. I knew exactly who I was talking to. I knew exactly what the door was and exactly what was going on. And it was interesting because there was no expectation about what the answer should be, yes or no, but it was energetically absolutely obvious that it needed an answer. Each one of us is a intentionally created divine being. We are not an accident. We are purposefully, lovingly, intentionally created, not an experiment, not a byproduct, but we're divine, created by this, I call it God, but all-powerful intelligence. I'm Kellen Flukiger. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, which is in Canada. I am a coach, and I have been for about 15 years. And before that, I had an executive career doing different things in the United States and Canada. And the last 15 years, I've written 19 books. And now my mission and purpose, I really do only one thing, and that's to help people realize who they really are. And what I mean by that is we feel a yearning to do something more. I call us mission, messengers, people that feel like they have a message, or visionaries, or movement makers, those kind of people that want to do something and they feel that yearning besides just the average stuff. I work with those people to turn that yearning into reality, help them figure out how to do it and what to say and where to go and what kind of products and services to produce, as I do it for myself. So all the books that I've written are about my own journey and work. And as things would have it, I had this experience 5 years ago where I died, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So in order to understand this, we need to back up just a little bit. Like I mentioned, I had a 30-year career as a very successful executive in the US and Canada, and that was on the outside. Behind the scenes, I was struggling mightily. I struggled with depression and addictions, and I was married and divorced 3 times, and I'd attempted suicide a couple times. So I had a very tumultuous and negative life, kind of like a movie, where in the front it looks really good, big shot, etc., and behind the scenes it was a disaster. And that's how I lived for most of my adult life. When I was 52, which was in 2007, I had what I call a divine intervention, an opportunity to see my life for what it was, a disaster, and basically start all over again. And by start over again, I mean it. Like, I walked away from a career of 30 years. I walked away from millions of dollars of contracts that I had and high ranking positions and everything, because it was killing me. And I got sober, and also at the same time, part of the divine intervention was to meet the woman who is now my wife of 16 years. So a lot of really fabulous things happened in a very short period of time. Scary things too. I walked away from everything and had no idea what I was going to do. Like, I'm starting over. Now what? I don't know. But anyway, I became an author and a coach and started creating some real success with that. And since 2007, I've written a lot of books and created a coaching practice that's very successful. And I was going along in that personal development. I made a lot of personal changes, did a lot of work with counselors and coaches and stuff myself, and was building quite a successful journey, feeling like I was doing the right thing. So that was the setup. for about 11 years between 2007, when I started that journey, and 2018, which is when the experience we're talking about today happened. So in the summer of 2018, my wife and I decided to go on a cruise in the Baltic Sea. And, I didn't know where the Baltic Sea was, but it's over where Helsinki and Oslo and St. Petersburg and Tallinn, Estonia goes east and west, which I didn't know. But anyway, so we did that and it was beautiful and we had a great time. And at the end, I got sick. And I was in Oslo. We were in Oslo and I just really started having a fever and could hardly walk and all that stuff. We flew home. That was on Monday. It was day one. And on Tuesday, we flew home from Amsterdam because we were finished and I was sick. I had a fever, and the ladies, the stewardesses, flight attendants on the plane were really nice. Today, of course, with COVID, they'd probably throw you out the window. But in those days, pre-COVID, they were nice and kept me comfortable. I got home on Tuesday afternoon and just kept getting sicker all week. So Wednesday, Thursday, and the beginning part of Friday passed with me getting worse every day, but kept thinking, well, it's just a really bad flu. I'll get over it. I'll get over it. And that was kind of stupid, but I did it anyway. And eventually on Friday, I decided I better go to the doctor. So in Canada, medical system, they have walk-in clinics where sometimes you make appointments, sometimes you just walk in. And we had one near our house that we regularly used for different things. So I went there to go have them take a look at me, and the nurse took one look at me and said, "You can't come in here. There's nothing we can do for you. You need to go directly to the emergency room." Well, that scared me. And so I'm like, okay. So we got in the car, went to the emergency room. And when you go to the ER in most places, it takes a little while to get seen. It might take half an hour, 2 hours, maybe longer. It depends on how many people are there and all the rest, and how many emergencies come in from ambulances. And I'd come in my own car. Well, my wife Joy drove me. But anyway, I looked so bad, I guess, that in 10 minutes I was in a private room, which I didn't know they had in emergency rooms. Usually they have just beds that are separated by these curtains. But I was in a private room with the door right away, and then a doctor came in right away. And so that made it really clear to me that I was in bad shape because they were all over me. So they started doing tests and x-rays and asking me again and again where I'd been. And I told them the story of the cruise, the cities we went to and everything. And as the day wore on, the messages back from the medical staff kept getting worse and worse. And they said, well, we think you have pneumonia. And then they came back and said, yeah, an hour would go by. You do have pneumonia, but it's in both lungs and it's just terrifyingly bad. And then all this time they were looking for a room to put me in because they said, yeah, we're going to admit you to the hospital. There's no question. We got to find a place. And so then late in the evening, they'd found a place, and I sent Joy home because we had dogs and cats and things. And so she needed to go take care of those. So they put me in a room, in a private room, which was also odd because, usually there's two people in a room. But anyway, I was in a private room, which was fun, but made me nervous. So then they came in, and the doctor came in and said, okay, yeah, we're going to probably have to move you to the ICU. And so intensive care, and that made me nervous. Oh dear. And so I thought about that for a bit. And then they came back in another hour and said, yeah, we're going to put you in biological isolation, which is like double doors and hazmat suits and all that stuff. And then I got scared, and I started to try to send a message to Joy. Then they came back again, and they asked a question that was just terrifying. The doctor said, do we have permission to intubate you, which means put tubes down your throat and your lungs and put you on life support? Do we have permission to intubate you and do anything we need to do to preserve your life? That scared the crap out of me. So I said, what? Okay. But that just was a real hard slap. Like, this is really serious. So then I started to meditate. I went into a state of meditation. Meditation is a practice that I've used all my life. Um, and while in meditation, I could feel something I'd never felt before. I could feel what felt to me like my body and my spirit unzipping like a zipper on a jacket. So I could feel myself separating gradually, pulling apart. The only conclusion I could come to was that I was dying, and my spirit was separating from my body. So I then took my phone and tried to finish the text, and I sent a text to Joy that just had 3 lines. And I was trembling at this point. I could, my body was crashing. Anyway, I said, the first line said, "I see you." And the second line said, "isolation/intubation." And the third line said, "I may be dying." And she didn't see that because by then she was asleep, because we'd agreed she was going to come back the next day because I was in the hospital. I mean, there was nothing for her to do. About 2:30 in the morning, she got a call from the nurse. "Are you coming?" And then she saw my text, and they had a conversation about what the heck is going on. So somewhere in that time frame between my meditation at about 11 and 2:30 or so in the morning, I died. My heart stopped. The crash cart code, whatever it is, blue, I think, but might be black, green, purple. I don't know. Whatever it is in the hospital. So I was crashed and flatlined. And that's when this experience began. So I came energetically, spiritually, I came to. In my mind, I was conscious. So I sat up, and I was horizontal because I was on a bed. So I sat up, and the room had changed. I was not seeing tubes and machines and everything. I was in what looked like a gray room, kind of a very soft photocard gray. And it felt a little foggy, like I couldn't really see how big the room was. Where are the walls? I don't know, ceiling. But over my left shoulder, I could see a doorway. And and it was really clear. It was just kind of over there. And I wanted to be at the doorway. And so all of a sudden I was at the doorway, and I was standing there leaning on the door jamb on my right shoulder. And across the door on the other door jamb was somebody leaning on that door jamb on their shoulder. They're close enough to touch. And then I noticed that my side of the door was this sort of soft gray, and the other side was white. And it wasn't light streaming through, but it was white on that side and gray on my side. And we stood there for a little while, and then this person looked at me and he said, "Do you want to come home?" And all the confusion evaporated. I knew exactly what was being asked. I knew exactly who I was talking to. I knew exactly what the door was and exactly what was going on. And it was interesting because there was no expectation about what the answer should be, yes or no, but it was energetically absolutely obvious that it needed an answer. There was a question and it needed an answer. And, I didn't think about it at the time, but it's obvious. I'm laying there dead on the table. So we talked about it for a little while. And what we talked about was what I'd been doing in the last 11 years since I, started on this path of coaching and helping people and spiritual work and all that stuff. So we talked about everything we'd done, everything we still had planned to do, and all that different stuff. And we just had a conversation that was very spacious and peaceful. At the end of the conversation, I said, "Well, I'm not done yet." And so he said, "Okay." So I'm quite certain that that's when they were able to restart my heart and return me to, at least to the beginning, to back to alive. The next day, and as an interesting side note, I wrote the book about it called Meeting God at the Door. And part of the book is exactly what I'm going to tell you now. But part of it was from Joy, where she told me what she was seeing in the ICU and the rooms while all this was going on. And, people running around frantically, jumping up and down on tables, trying to do all the stuff that you see in movies. when they're doing, that they're doing to people. So that was going on too, but I didn't have any perception of that. Anyway, the next day, and people always ask when I do these conversations, how do you know it was the next day? The answer is, I don't know, but I know it was the next day. So we were back at the doorway, and the question of the previous day didn't come up. Like, that was decided. So you're going to stay. So then the conversation was about, all right, well, what are you going to do? And it wasn't that blunt, but it was like, okay, so you're not done. What is the not doneness? And so we talked about the work that I was doing, the coaching practice, my desire to help people and by help people, what I mean by that is help each person who's interested, because being interested or not's a choice, understand who they really are, like expand the limited vision that we have of our possibilities. And, that's the work I'm involved in anyway, and was, but so we talked about doing more of that and how to do it better and just all kinds of stuff. And it was very enlightening and joyful. And then I had an experience that is like, I picked this picture on the background because it's outer space, and that little thing right there is a kid. If you blow it up big enough, you can see that's a child sitting there with her, it looks like a girl, her elbows on her knees at the entrance of some kind of a starport. But anyway, it felt like I had an experience traveling through the universe, in an ability to see the glory and power and magnitude and infinity of all these things. And when I talk about this, I make reference to a movie that you may or may not have seen. It came out a long time ago in the 80s, but it was a movie when there was a lot of conversation about aliens and first contact and, extraterrestrials and that sort of thing. And this movie is about that. It's called Contact. And it's after a book written by Carl Sagan, who is a big extraterrestrial researcher. But anyway, in that movie, they get some communication from outer space. They build this incredible device. And as they operate the device, the passenger in the device, it falls through this energetic column, but doesn't really go anywhere from the outside. But in the inside, what she experiences as she goes on a trip through the universe. And so I refer to that movie because that's the only thing I've ever seen that feels a little bit like what happened, what I saw. So if you haven't seen that movie, it's worth a look. But anyway, I felt like I was being fed from a fire hose. And what I mean by that is information, vision, seeing things on a grand and infinite scale that I can't even begin to articulate. And I also felt like if I hadn't been in some kind of a protective bubble, energetic bubble or something, I would have been incinerated with the glory, the magnitude, all that stuff. So that went on it felt like a really long time. I don't know how long. When that was finished, we were back at the door, and I was sort of breathless and thinking about what the trip through the universe had taught me. And I summarized it in my mind in four key points. And here's what they are. Number one, each one of us is a intentionally created divine being. We are not an accident. We are purposefully, lovingly, intentionally created, not an experiment, not a byproduct, but we're divine, created by this, I call it God, but all-powerful intelligence. That by itself is like earth-shaking, because we live a lot of our lives wondering about that question and wondering whether or not there's any meaning. And so to know that for absolute certainty was really powerful. The second thing was that not only are we created intentionally, lovingly, and purposefully, but we have a mission, a purpose, a reason. There's a mission and purpose that we have for this existence. And we not only knew what it was, but we were excited about it. We were stoked. We agreed to it. We were stoked about it before we came here. So there was some preparation involved, and it was exciting. The third thing was that we were blessed or given the gifts and talents that we need to both enjoy and complete that assignment, mission, purpose. And the fourth thing is that all the help we need is available from both sides of that door. Now, each one of those by themselves is a staggering thing. And people have thought and asked and wondered those, all of them, before. So they're not new. But to know them in the way that I saw is very present and powerful. So as I pondered those four things, it occurred to me that me and everybody else obviously lives far below what we're capable of. We access far less than what we could, than our birthright, than our capability. And so my question was, I said, so, okay, since that's true, why do we settle for crumbs? Like mostly we just settle for like nothing. What? Why do we do that? And it was almost funny because, I mean, nothing about the situation was funny, but it was sort of, because I don't know if in the economy of heaven, brevity is a virtue, but the answer that came was just four words. He looked at me and he said, because you don't believe. And the answer was so breathtaking and also so obvious that it was like facepalm, duh. I didn't do that, but I thought about it. And so I said, okay. And then my immediate yearning was to do something about that. Okay, we don't believe, okay, of course, what can I do? How can I, in my mission and purpose, how can I serve and help with this thing? Right. And again, the answer was really short. Oh, glad you asked. And so then the second part of this conversation was really long. And it consisted of some principles about how to change our beliefs. Like, we're born with no beliefs at all. We're born with kind of a blank slate, and our life experience, how we're treated, what we learn, whether we're born in wealth or poverty, whether we are treated well or treated poorly, all those things teach us, whether we want it to or not, about how the world works and what to expect and what we believe is possible and all of the rest of that. And so we end up with a set of beliefs. I call it our context, because, you've heard people say, well, they quote somebody, right, to try to prove something. And then someone else says, yeah, but that's out of context. And what they mean by that is, by itself, that doesn't mean what you think it means. Okay. So our context is all of those collection of beliefs. I use an acronym, BD: beliefs, definitions, experiences, expectations, and perceptions. That set of things forms what we believe is possible in the world, how the world works. And I call it a context straitjacket, because it limits what we try, and it limits what we think is possible, and it limits all those things until we get rid of it. And so the second part of this conversation, when I ask how can I help, was a framework about how to change those beliefs, about a process of activities to change beliefs, to identify a belief that you're questioning and wondering if it's true, and then a process to do something to change it. Now, that whole process and framework I wrote in a companion book. I didn't put that in Meeting God at the Door, because it was a whole book by itself. So that book's called The Book of Context, not surprisingly, but it's about how to identify and change our context. So anyway, that was done. And it seemed like a very, very long conversation in two parts, both of which were long. So then the third conversation was the next day. And when I came back to the door this time, I was very excited. I was energized. I felt like somebody sitting on one of those bouncy balls at a desk, that were popular for a while. And you bounce kind of. I felt like that. I was bouncing, and I was repeating everything that I learned, and I was kind of jumping up and down, excited and everything. We're back at the door, and He looked at me and he just asked one question. He said, "Are you sure?" And I almost panicked. I felt like, oh dear, I missed something. What do you mean, am I sure? Am I stupid? Did I miss something? Is this possible? Am I going to fail? Like, what? Am I sure? And so I felt a little panicked. But anyway, so we talked about every possible way I could think about the question, all those things. Am I biting off more than I can chew? Is this even possible? Can I get the help I need? Am I an idiot? Like what? All of that. We talked it through. And finally I said, yeah, I'm sure. And so then he said, okay. And that was the end. And it's interesting because nothing was said, but the conversation ended with a finality that I knew we were done. So that was the completion of the 3 conversations in those 3 days. I remained in a comatose, for another 14 days. And the illness that I had was fatal. I mean, it was a fatal illness. The doctor told me later that the 10-day mortality, the 10-day kill rate of what I had was 100%. And so I was an impossible exception, meaning that's how urgent the thing that I was infected with was. And it was a necrotizing, which is a flesh-eating bacteria, MRSA, and I had it in both my lungs and in my bloodstream in the most infected way possible. A couple of the doctors said they'd never seen pneumonia this bad in their entire career, that kind of description. So it wasn't any surprise that it was fatal. What the surprise was is that I was allowed to live and that I recovered. And when I came out of the coma, I had lost 35 pounds. I'd lost practically all muscular movement. I couldn't walk. My lungs were destroyed. And so recovery was a long work. It was several days before I could even get out of bed and stand up and start to walk and all of that sort of thing. I was in the hospital for another several days and eventually got released in another miraculous discharge, but it wasn't a near death or visit with God, but it was another set of miracles that even got me out of the hospital. So that's the completion of the experience of what happened. And as I mentioned, I've written a couple of books about it. One's called Meeting God at the Door, Conversations, Choices, and Commitments of a Near-Death Experience. And the companion book is the Book of Context. And I separated them because they needed to be separated. One stands by itself. The Book of Context is something you can just use to work on beliefs, and the other's the whole experience. So there's the story. That's what happened 5 years ago in June. So it's interesting because I got out of the hospital in July, about a month after I went in, and getting back to walk and everything. And I started writing these books. And by October, which was 2-3 months later, I could walk well enough to do some of the stuff that I did, which is speaking. I would go speak at different conferences. And I went to a conference that October to speak, and I was asked to speak about what had just happened. And I still look like, a concentration camp survivor, but I did. And I talked for about an hour and a half about what happened. And the lady in the it was time Q&A afterwards. And she asked me, what's the biggest thing that has changed for you since this happened? And that's what I thought of when you asked this question. And I'll get into the career part in a minute, but I hadn't really prepared for questions. I hadn't thought about it. And so while I was thinking about it, I heard my mouth open and say, I no longer experience fear. And I didn't prepare for that. It just sort of came out, right? I no longer experience fear. And so I thought about this question and the answer. And so how that affects my career is part of coaching is you're trying to help people do something, right? Sometimes they want to start a business and then you're functioning, call it life coach, but as a business coach or relationships, but it really all centers on who a person's being and what they believe about themselves and what's possible. And when I used to enroll people or talk about stuff, I always felt worried a little. Am I going to offend them? Am I going to ask good questions? And that's just a little bit of the business piece, right? And what I've discovered since then in the last 5 years is it's absolutely true. I no longer experience that. I look at people, I look at you, and I absolutely love you. I love you for what you're doing, for what you're trying to bring to the world, for who you've chosen to be. And all of that just makes everything else disappear. And I just had a call this morning with a lady. I never met her before. She was on a seminar that I spoke at this last weekend. And we only got to talk for about 40 minutes. But I think she's very, really cool at what she does. And she's really struggling with typical questions. How do I make money? How do I create products with what I blah, 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 all that. And there's nothing wrong with those questions. They're very right. But because I don't experience any fear about anything, I'm able to just lean in and help her. And I'm quite certain that in the process of helping her, she will join one of my programs. I don't know that yet, but I feel like that. I'm quite certain. And so, how it affects my career is I'm way better at what I do. My business is way better because it has created a circumstance where none of the conversations have anything to do with me. It's like I'm not there. I'm just with someone all in. And people feel that, and they feel heard, and they feel possibility in a way that I couldn't do before. And so that's probably the most powerful effect on my career. I help more people and make more money. And it's not even about money because I don't even care. I go into every conversation not needing anything, just to find out what's going to be there. Does that make sense? Spiritually, my physical health is still trashed. My lungs may never recover. I still have, lung problems and, that kind of stuff. They told me my lungs may never recover because of how badly they were damaged. So we're working on it, and I can do a lot more than I could. And 5 years have gone by, but I am not up to 100% by any stretch. And that probably won't ever happen. They did a electrocardiogram and my heart wasn't damaged, but it could have been because the bugs were in my bloodstream too, but my lungs were trashed. And so I'm only up to about 70 or 75% of lung capacity, but my heart and my spirit and my energy and everything are good. And to be honest with you, I don't care anymore about all that other stuff that I used to care about. It's not important. The only question that matters is, am I able to meet each person that I talk to, whether it's here as a guest for you or talking to that lady this morning? And I have, 3 more conversations this afternoon with people. Some are clients and some are not. Am I able to show up for them and see what they need and serve them in some good way? That's the only question that's in my mind. When you look at just this life, there's all kinds of bad things. I mean, we got war going on. One started in, that war in Israel now going on. And we got the war in Ukraine, and we got starvation going on. And we got all kinds of dictators and creeps and other things happening in the world. And so if you only look at the experiences of this, I was raised in an abusive household. I just got sick and died. Everybody, and I'm not saying mine's, everybody has a whole pile of really difficult things to go through. That seems to be the design. The design of this experience is a bunch of hard stuff. It was not designed as a picnic. Now, if we want to argue about the design later, then later we can talk to God and say, hey, that was whatever. But the answer is, I think we knew exactly what we were signing up for. I think we volunteered 100%, but I don't think we had any idea how it was going to feel because we hadn't had a physical body yet and we had no reference. So intellectually, we may have understood what we were going to do and that it was going to be hard, but that's like going to a restaurant. You get the menu at a restaurant and it describes the food. And in expensive restaurants, it describes how it's prepared and all these details about it. And that's all cool. but it has nothing to do with what happens when you take a bite. Right? When you actually eat the thing, it's a completely different experience than reading the menu, no matter how good the menu is. And I think it was a little bit like that. So we chose, we knew it was going to be a lot of difficult things. And we said, we're in, we want to experience this for growth and learning and whatever other purposes. And I doubt very much that we had the kind of comprehension that we do now when we go through those things. It's like you were asking me about the experience, and I'm saying I went through on this journey through space in a protective bubble and saw the universe. Those are the words, but there aren't any there isn't any language that I can use to help somebody understand what that felt like and what I learned and saw. I mean, no language. So yes, we chose it. Yes, we wanted to. Yes, we knew what we were going to get in for. And I doubt very much that we had any idea what it was going to feel like.
I believe those what you learned in during the time that you traveled the universe, those knowledge was not meant for this earth, for this human experience. So you were the chosen one to translate those knowledge into what we can understand.
I'm one of many. I mean, everybody has intuition and inspiration and guidance, and it comes to you as a podcast host, and it comes to every person in their own way. I don't have any idea why I got to see what I saw, and I don't have the language to describe it very well. But what it made me know is that those four things I told you, I know they're true. And I know it in a way that I can't explain, and I can't go into a laboratory and prove. But there's nothing in the universe that would make me unknow those things. Right. And so, I don't think I'm anybody special. Everybody gets their own connection and develops all those things. You know how I look at it? I died and I had the terrible physical things that I'm still dealing with, but I count it all as a giant blessing. And here's the reason. 11 years before that, my life was a wreck. I was a wealthy, selfish, single, again for the third time, lousy parent, lousy person, had more money than I knew what to do with, drug addict, miserable cuss. And so I was given the opportunity to change, and I took it and did all the work required. And 11 years later, I had this happen. And you could look at it like, oh, this terrible illness. I love it. I wouldn't trade it for anything.